World War II is a time period of our history that encompasses the best and worst of humanity. It is my personal favourite historical time period because of the stories of bravery, heroism, against all odds victories, and patriotism. It does, however, come with the obvious flip side to those events. The heartbreak, the tragedy, the grotesque and inexcusable violence, and all-around horrors of war make this period of history full of valuable lessons that we must never forget. The yin and yang of these stories has, however, meant that the opportunities to tell these stories in books, films, and games is near limitless. In the world of games, there was one that sought to do that, arguably more than any other. Before Call of Duty took over the world and became the face of the war shooter, before Battle Royales and Modern Warfare took over the FPS landscape, there was a game born not in a boardroom, but in a film studio. A game shaped by one of the most celebrated filmmakers in Hollywood, and that game was Medal of Honor, and it changed everything. In the late 1990s, fresh off the success of Saving Private Ryan, Steven Spielberg wanted to find a new way to connect younger generations to the reality and sacrifice of World War II. The idea was simple but profound. Take the emotional storytelling of cinema and bring it to life in an interactive form. He imagined a game that would not glorify war, but reflect its cost, its tension, and its humanity. Spielberg's own father was a World War II veteran, and this deeply personal connection helped shape the emotional tone of the project. The result was the 1999 Medal of Honor, developed by the Spielberg-founded DreamWorks Interactive for the original PlayStation. The game wasn't just another shooter, it had a real soul. Set in Nazi-occupied Europe, players stepped into the boots of Lieutenant Jimmy Patterson, an OSS operative undertaking high-risk missions behind enemy lines. Gameplay focused on methodical movement and stealth over brute force, encouraging players to carefully time their actions and observe enemy patterns. Weapons had weight and sound, and reloading under pressure created genuine tension. The AI wasn't perfect, but for its time it was impressively reactive, investigating noise and responding to alarms. Graphically, the original Medal of Honor pushed the PlayStation's limits. Textures were gritty and environments felt cold and oppressive. Lighting effects enhanced immersion, especially in dim corridors or bombed-out ruins. The sound design added atmosphere and helped you feel engrossed in the game. From the clatter of weapons to distant artillery, the game created a soundscape that felt alive. Most notably, Michael Giacchino's orchestral score brought emotion and gravity, turning each mission into a scene from a war film. But what truly set Medal of Honor apart was its sense of purpose. It wasn't about kill counts or power fantasies, it was about duty, danger, and sacrifice. Players weren't mowing down waves of enemies for points, they were accomplishing sensitive missions, often alone and without backup, inside hostile territory. The sense of vulnerability and immersion was key. For many players, this was their first time experiencing a war game that treated its subject matter with the gravity and emotional resonance that it deserves. The game also laid the groundwork for historical context in interactive media. Between missions, players received authentic briefings, complete with maps and intelligence reports. These segments served not just to set up the action, but to educate players on the broader scope of World War II operations. It was clear Spielberg's cinematic values had found a new home. Medal of Honor Underground built on that foundation. It followed Manon Baptiste, a member of the French resistance introduced in the first game. Her missions emphasised espionage and sabotage, showing a different kind of heroism. Untrained, vulnerable, yet fiercely committed. Levels were more complex, spanning Paris streets, North African cities, and Gestapo headquarters. The game refined stealth elements with darker environments and more dynamic enemy patrols. Graphical upgrades improved the texture detail and character animations, and Giacchino returned to deliver another standout score, this time in a more melancholic and personal fashion. Manon's perspective added another layer of humanity to the franchise. Unlike Patterson, she wasn't a soldier by training. She was a civilian-turned-fighter, resisting an occupying force from within. This not only gave the narrative a different tone, but also introduced more diverse gameplay. Missions often required players to navigate occupied areas in disguise, interact with civilian NPCs, and use improvised weapons and gadgets. Underground's willingness to showcase underrepresented perspectives made it a rare entry in the FPS genre. Underground also introduced more varied mission structures, from high-speed vehicle chases to tense escapes through labyrinth bunkers. Its pacing was dynamic, balancing explosive set pieces with quiet, tension-filled infiltration. Though limited by PlayStation hardware, the game's ambition was unmistakable. Each mission felt handcrafted, with atmospheric lighting, haunting musical cues, and story moments that lingered long after the credits rolled. Then came Medal of Honor Allied Assault, which was a monumental leap forward and a defining moment for the series. Released in 2002 for PC, it was developed by 2015 Inc., a studio filled with developers who would later go on to create Call of Duty. Built on the ID Tech 3 engine, Allied Assault offered a dramatic jump in fidelity and ambition, delivering some truly incredibly cinematic missions. The crown jewel of the game was the Omaha Beach landing sequence, a near-playable reenactment of Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan. Players waded through surf under withering MG-42 fire, witnessing their fellow soldiers fall one by one. The chaos was overwhelming. Explosions shook the screen, bullets tore through the air, and the cries of wounded men filled your ears. It wasn't just a technical achievement, it was emotional. This mission alone etched Allied Assault into gaming history. But Allied Assault was more than its beach landing. The campaign spanned multiple theatres of war, placing players in sabotage operations, rescue missions, and covert ops deep behind enemy lines. Scuttling U-529 inside a German submarine pen was particularly enthralling. Each level was meticulously designed with branching paths, environmental storytelling, and varying mission objectives that kept the pace fresh. Players often found themselves improvising, hiding in shadows, planting explosives, or stealing enemy documents. There was a palpable tension to each encounter, a sense that you truly were behind enemy lines. Gameplay mechanics were refined and tactical. Just like the first two games, health didn't regenerate, forcing players to search for medkits and pick their battles wisely. On harder difficulties, this was particularly important as enemy AI was formidable for its time. Flanking, calling for reinforcements, or retreating when overwhelmed. The arsenal felt grounded. Thompson submachine guns rattled with satisfying weight, rifles kicked hard, and grenades had realistic physics. Each weapon had distinct handling and audio feedback that encouraged experimentation. It also introduced semi-squad dynamics, where AI allies helped in battle but weren't invincible. The sound design was another high point. Footsteps echoed through concrete corridors, artillery roared in the distance, and voice lines barked in German as enemies coordinated attacks. These audio cues weren't just atmosphere, they were gameplay tools. Players learned to listen, to anticipate, and to react. Coupled with another stirring orchestral score by Michael Giacchino, Allied Assault turned each mission into a tightly crafted war movie. Now by this point, Steven Spielberg had actually sold the franchise to EA, with DreamWorks Interactive being renamed to LA Los Angeles, which would eventually go on to become DICE Los Angeles, which of course is the Battlefield studio of today. Spielberg's involvement continued though despite this, as he was once again heavily involved in the creation and story of this game, as he had been for the previous two when his own development house was at the helm. In 2002, Medal of Honor Frontline arrived on consoles and reimagined many of Allied Assault's concept, but most definitely had its own identity. You again played as Jimmy Patterson, undertaking missions across Europe, including another enthralling portrayal of the D-Day landing at Omaha Beach, an unforgettable train yard infiltration, and a tense finale in a German submarine pen. The game's level design was tighter, built around set pieces and cinematic pacing. Every level was distinct in layout and tone, ranging from silent infiltration to bombastic firefights. Frontline's controls were refined for dual analog sticks, making the PS2 and the Xbox versions highly playable. The graphics were crisp for their era with a stylized filmic colour palette, and Giacchino's score was his best yet. Romantic, tragic, and bold, giving the game emotional highs and lows that matched the player's journey. Animations were more lifelike, and the game balanced realism with playability in a way that few shooters of the time managed to achieve. Next came Medal of Honor Rising Sun in 2003, which shifted focus to the Pacific Theater, which at the time was largely unexplored. The opening mission set during the attack on Pearl Harbor was ambitious, placing players on a PT boat amid the chaos of the attack. It was a huge technical and cinematic feat for consoles. Water effects, dynamic explosions, and aerial dogfights filled the screen. While the game had clear technical ambition, there were some aspects that were aging by this point. Its mechanics felt clunkier, hit detection could be unreliable, and enemy AI oscillated between brain dead and laser accurate. Still, Rising Sun had heart. The co-op mode brought a new dynamic, letting players share the story of Joe Griffin as he fought across the Pacific Islands. The environments were varied and the attention to detail was fantastic in representing those dense jungles, POW camps and riverboats. The game told a story of loyalty, brotherhood and cultural contrast. Its musical themes incorporated Pacific instrumentation while maintaining the series' signature orchestral depth. And while less polished than its predecessors, Rising Sun broadened the series' perspective and showed that Medal of Honor was willing to take creative risks. Medal of Honor Pacific Assault then released in 2004 for PC, and it marked a significant tonal and technical shift for the series. It brought players to the Pacific Theatre, putting them in the boots of Private Tommy Conlin, a US Marine who was thrust into the chaos of war from the attack on Pearl Harbor to the brutal island campaigns like Guadalcanal and Tarawa. Pacific Assault sought to deliver a more personal, squad-based narrative, complete with persistent teammates, emotional cutscenes, and flashback-driven storytelling. Gameplay in Pacific Assault emphasised teamwork and survival over lone wolf heroics. Players could command their squad, call for corpsmen when injured, and had to manage limited ammo and resources. The addition of iron sights and more realistic ballistics made firefights slower and more intense than previous entries. The AI, while occasionally flawed, was more advanced, allowing for flanking manoeuvres and better use of cover. Visually, Pacific Assault was a standout. Dense jungle foliage, blazing sun over the Pacific, and cinematic water effects created a vibrant yet brutal battlefield. Sound design captured the cacophony of tropical warfare. Chirping birds that were silenced by the gunfire, screams mixed with the roar of Japanese charges. The score adapted dynamically as well, becoming serene or chaotic to match the player's actions. Despite its ambition, Pacific Assault received a mixed critical reception. Some praised its more mature tone and depth of gameplay, but others criticised its performance issues and inconsistent pacing. Still, its attempts to deepen the emotional resonance of the series was seen as a bold evolution. Following Pacific Assault, 2005's Medal of Honor European Assault brought the series back to the European theatre, but with a few twists. Players assumed the role of Lieutenant William Holt, an Office of Strategic Services operative, participating in key missions across France, the Soviet Union, and North Africa. Developed by EA Los Angeles, European Assault introduced semi-open level designs and a greater emphasis on player choice in mission structure. Rather than strictly linear paths, players were encouraged to explore zones, complete objectives in varying orders, and uncover hidden intel. This added replay value and a strategic layer to mission planning. The combat was fast and visceral, thanks to tighter aiming mechanics and more aggressive AI. Squad mates played a lesser role than in Pacific Assault, allowing for more solitary, focused gameplay reminiscent of earlier titles. Graphically, European Assault took advantage of the then current generation of hardware, offering rich detail in environments and improved character models. It leaned into a more cinematic presentation with stylish transitions, moody lighting, and slow-motion adrenaline mode sequences that were triggered by kill streaks. These moments added drama, but also edged the game closer to arcade-style action and away from the slower, realistic gameplay that Medal of Honor's foundations were made of. This point is further emphasised by the god-awful looking icons everywhere donating where to go and where the ammo and health pickups are. Not to mention the stupidity of only giving the player a few seconds to pick them up before they disappear for good. Critically, the game was well received, but not without caveats. Many praised its variety in setting and mission types, while some felt the story lacked the emotional pull of earlier entries. Nevertheless, European Assault represented a polished, action-focused installment that balanced innovation with franchise familiarity. Medal of Honor Vanguard came next, releasing in 2007 for the PlayStation 2 and the Wii. It attempted to recapture the series' World War II roots during a time when modern military shooters were beginning to dominate the landscape. Developed by EA Los Angeles, the game cast players as Corporal Frank Keegan of the 82nd Airborne Division, dropping behind enemy lines in pivotal operations such as Operation Husky and Operation Varsity. Vanguard's most unique feature was its use of the airborne insertion at the beginning of each mission. Players could steer Keegan during descent, choosing their own landing zone, allowing for a less linear approach to missions. While the gameplay returned to traditional run-and-gun mechanics, it introduced iron sights and limited weapon customization, helping to modernise the combat while maintaining its World War II authenticity. Graphically, the game was very modest by 2007 standards, but it was notable for how it squeezed atmospheric lighting and environmental detail out of aging hardware. The sound design once again carried emotional weight, with rousing orchestral compositions and immersive battlefield audio. While Vanguard didn't quite reach the heights of Allied Assault or Frontline, it served as a respectful swan song to this series' classic era on that generation of consoles. For many, it was a nostalgic reminder of what Medal of Honor once stood for: grounded, cinematic, wartime storytelling. Despite those merits, Vanguard was met with mixed reviews upon release. Critics noted the lack of innovation and polish, especially in comparison to competing titles like Call of Duty 3, which released the same year. Enemy AI was often criticised for being too simplistic and easily exploitable, and the level design, whilst occasionally inspired, suffered from repetitiveness. On the Wii, motion controls felt imprecise, hampering immersion during firefights. The visuals, though serviceable, couldn't compete with the rising expectations of the next generation of consoles. Nevertheless, for fans of the franchise, Vanguard offered a familiar, if slightly dated, return to the formula that first made Medal of Honor a household name. 2007's Medal of Honor Airborne marked a major shift in design philosophy. Players could once again choose their parachute drop points, changing how each mission unfolded. This freedom introduced a semi-open design that encouraged replayability and experimentation. Missions in Sicily, the Netherlands and Germany featured verticality and layered objectives. Built on Unreal Engine 3, the game looked mightily impressive. Dynamic animations, realistic physics and varied textures gave each battlefield a fresh look. The upgradable weapon system and tactical AI elevated the gameplay depth. Airborne was the most innovative Medal of Honor in years, but despite its boldness, it struggled to find commercial success. This was due to a combination of factors including mixed reviews, a confusing storyline, glitches, and a sense that in a fairly dense field of World War II titles at the time, the game was not innovative enough compared to those other games on the market. Keep in mind, by this point, we are also very much in the COD peak years, so players' eyes were definitely being drawn elsewhere. While some players praised the visuals and vertical combat, others found the difficulty level uneven and raised concerns about the game's compatibility on certain platforms. Then came the reboot. In 2010, EA took the series to modern warfare, chasing the success of Call of Duty. Simply titled Medal of Honor, the game followed Tier 1 operators in Afghanistan. It focused on realism and authenticity, consulting real military advisors during its development. The result was a grounded, gritty shooter with tight gunplay and emotional cutscenes. This chasing of success, which is rarely a good thing, meant that certain aspects of the game suffered and drew criticism. Low texture quality, glitches, and AI being the most commonly mentioned things that people disliked. The sound design was once again impactful, but the multiplayer that was developed separately by DICE felt undercooked. It had terrible spawn camping issues, and many said it lacked replayability and was too similar to Call of Duty. But the storyline was evocative. It had soul, it had emotion, and the intensity gripped you just like the Medal of Honors of old. You feel the connection with your squad mates, and you develop a bond with them as the game progresses. This was a huge deviation from the World War II theatre that we have been used to, but in my opinion, EA did a good job despite the lack of critical and commercial success. We weren't done yet though. Medal of Honor Warfighter followed in 2012, continuing the story of elite soldiers. It improved graphics using the Frostbite 2 engine, but lacked a coherent identity. The campaign tried to balance family drama with global terrorism, but it didn't quite land. Warfighter couldn't deliver an experience like the previous installment did, and whilst the graphics and sound were on point once again, as is to be expected with this franchise, that is where the positives finished. The story was forgettable, and aside from a few cool cinematic sequences, it is an incredibly disappointing experience. Performance was poor, and the gameplay was mediocre. Multiplayer again felt disjointed, and despite technical advancements, Warfighter's reception was poor. Warfighter was the last in an already downward trending franchise, and it plummeted after this entry. Medal of Honor had attempted to replicate the success of Call of Duty. It had abandoned elements of its own roots to try and emulate its competitor, but it failed. And sadly, shortly after that, the franchise was shelved. Then, after years of silence, the franchise returned in 2020 with Medal of Honor Above and Beyond, a bold attempt to bring the series into the world of virtual reality. Developed by Respawn Entertainment, the game was built for Oculus platforms and sought to recapture the original game's emotion and historical impact using immersive VR mechanics. Above and Beyond allowed players to physically crouch behind cover, aim down the sights using their own hands, and interact with objects in the world in intuitive ways. Missions spanned Europe, echoing earlier titles with sabotage, stealth, and all-out warfare. While the VR format brought intense immediacy to firefights and exploration, the game struggled with pacing and technical performance. Cutscenes broke immersion, and movement systems sometimes felt awkward or disjointed, as is often the case with VR games. However, it did include a touching gallery mode. Mini documentaries featuring real World War II veterans sharing stories and reflections. This mode stood out, connecting the player directly to the history that inspired the game. Above and Beyond was a flawed but heartfelt tribute that hinted at the potential of VR storytelling in historical games, even if it didn't quite reignite the franchise's former glory. Whilst that mode is of huge interest to me and could represent an intriguing new path for VR titles to explore, what is most interesting about this mode is that it felt like a small homage to the game's roots. These stories, the history on display and the tributes to those that fought and died to protect our freedoms was basically what inspired this series into life back in the late 90s. This is what Spielberg's original vision was. This is what Medal of Honor was meant to be all along. So when it's all said and done, I guess the big question is, what happened to those storied, tense, emotional and cinematic single-player games that Medal of Honor was known for? And more broadly, why has the entire World War II genre seemingly disappeared from the FPS market? Well, many would say it was just that the interest dropped in World War II, and therefore modern-day shooters became the interesting time zone in which people wanted to play in. But it wasn't just the industry moving on, it was a shift in gamer priorities. In a market increasingly obsessed with online competition, cosmetics, kill-death ratios and seasonal updates, a quiet, introspective war story with limited replayability and no real opportunity to further monetize in the way that the others were doing, no longer seemed marketable. By the late 2000s, modern military shooters were in. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare changed everything, redefining what players expected from the first-person shooter. Fast-paced gameplay, modern weapons, urban battlefields, and cinematic set pieces became the new gold standard. Gamers were no longer storming beaches in Normandy, they were breaching doors in Baghdad or piloting drones over mountain ranges instead. Developers and publishers like EA pivoted to meet the demand. EA alternated between Battlefield and Medal of Honor, trying desperately to eat into that market share that Call of Duty had swallowed up. Games like Call of Duty embraced spectacle and speed. Meanwhile, Medal of Honor was built on slow tension, historical context, and emotional resonance. It simply could not compete in a race that it was not designed to run in. There's also the matter of narrative fatigue. World War II had been the setting of countless games by the mid-2000s. Beaches, bunkers, bombed out towns, it all started to feel like players had seen it all before. In an industry obsessed with what's next, World War II felt like the past in more ways than one. And as a result, today, despite one or two exceptions, very few games tackle World War II with the sincerity that it deserves. We get the occasional throwback level or side mode, but most major shooters have left the era behind. The emotional weight, the moral complexity and the raw humanity of that conflict is all too easily lost in favour of kill streaks and battle passes. So maybe, now more than ever, we need games like Medal of Honor. Games that remind us what war really means, that show courage without glorification, that remember history, not just recreate it. Spielberg's original vision was never about entertainment for its own sake. It was about storytelling. It was about empathy. It was about education. He wanted to reach a generation that might never sit through a black and white documentary on TV, but would pick up a controller. So it is with regret that Medal of Honor, once the definitive World War II shooter, became a ghost of its former self before attempting to switch to keep up with market trends. After Warfighter in 2012, the series was put on an indefinite hiatus, and with it, a certain chapter of video game history came to a close. In a world filled with endless, fast-paced, forgettable shooters that glorify aspects of war, maybe it's time to remember the one game that asked us to think, not just react. A return to Medal of Honor's roots could matter now more than ever, not just to relive nostalgia, but to remind us of what games can do when they blend artistry, history, and humanity. It didn't just simulate war, it gave it meaning. Maybe it's time for Medal of Honor to come back. Thanks everyone for watching this video. I am really keen to know whether you guys are as keen to see a return to form of World War II gaming, for games like Medal of Honor in particular. Is now the time for a more gritty, single-player focused story set in that theatre of war? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. This has been comfortably my favourite video of the channel so far. I've absolutely loved playing all these old Medal of Honor games again and reliving my old, my youth and my teen years, but also because I love World War II so much. It's been an absolute blast putting this video together. So please like and subscribe and ring that notification bell if you agree and you enjoyed this. It would really help out the channel, and I'll see you all on the next one.